How you doing, guys? Today, a little status update on my senior and what will be transpiring hopefully over the next couple months and getting that project a little closer to the finish line. One of the aspects of the senior that I've been working on a little bit, or at least doing some layout on, is the steering box. Now, the steering box on my senior originally when I got it was completely destroyed. The worm gear, which we'll look at, was totally worn out. The case was cracked, as well as the side cover. So one of the things that I was lucky enough to find was an old, I can't remember, it was an Ottawa tractor. And it had a perfect Ross steering box in it. The only thing was that the worm gear worked in the opposite direction as to my senior worm gear, which we'll take a look at in a second. And what that caused is that you would have to go right, you'd have to turn the steering wheel left, and to go left, you had to turn the steering wheel right. So the worm gear and the actual steering shaft was not going to work with the senior. So I had to kind of piecemeal parts together in order to essentially build a new steering box for my senior. Now, what you're looking at here is mostly the Ottawa parts, but there are a number of my original senior parts that we can discuss. So essentially what I have here is I have a layout of the steering box itself. So the housing is right here. It's a Ross steering box, which is common, I guess, in older Jeeps. This one has the 7/8 selector arm, and it's a single pin selector arm. A lot of the rebuild kits have a dual pin selector arm. Won't work in this box because it's too small. We have the selector arm, we have the steering box. Inside this steering box there are two bushings that the selector arm rides on, as well as a grease seal. All that stuff I pressed out. And this nut and lock washer are actually the mounting lock washer and nut, which the pitman arm goes on the splines. There's a side cover which bolts right there. We have an adjuster nut which goes into here and puts pressure on the back side of the selector arm in order to set the preload of the pin in the worm gear. So that's those parts. This part, this is the cap. It goes right in this position, and it puts the preload on the bearings of the worm gear. Now, this is the original worm gear from my senior, and that is the original steering shaft tube of my senior. Number one, as all aspects of the senior, some imbecile who owned it just decided to just butcher every goddamn part of this tractor. And if I could ever find that person, I would have a stern conversation, and then I'd hit them over the head with a 2x4 because what they did to this tractor is just completely bastardized. Number one, they cut the tube to fix the shaft, which they didn't fix the shaft. They basically just jammed it into the old steering box and then decided to crank everything down to 100 psi and basically broke and stripped everything. So whatever. So this has to be replaced. The upper tube has to be replaced. This is the original steering shaft from my senior. I did have to cut the top of it off in order to get it all apart, and we'll talk about that at a later date. But this is the worm gear. It's all worn off. There's a bearing retainer that's supposed to be here at the end where a clip goes on. They decided to cut the damn thing off. So the worm gear is just totally destroyed. So I had to find a replacement one. And trying to find one for this style steering box at the time when I was looking for these parts a couple years ago, it was pretty hard to find. But I found this worm gear right here, which twists in the correct direction. Okay, and has the bearing retainer piece, which is just this little piece where this clip goes on. That one's missing it because they cut it off. And it has the retainer up here also to hold the roller bearings. This is the bottom of the worm gear. This roller bearing sits into this surface right here. This roller bearing basically is supposed to sit flush or just a couple thousandths proud over this edge. So when you put the cap on with the gasket, it puts the preload. Now here's the issue. This worm gear is actually a hair bigger or longer than the original. So what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and we'll slide that into the steering box so we can take a look. And we're just going to go like this. I'm trying to do this one-handed. There we go. All right, so that's seated. And as you can see, this bearing sits a little too high for this steering box. And that's because this worm gear, which is from a John Deere tractors, or was the parts were from a John Deere or under John Deere part numbers, obviously is a little bit different. So I'm going to have to make a spacer, like a steel spacer to go here. So when I put the cap on, it holds it like this. It's no big deal. Just want to make sure I get the proper preload on it. Now I thought about, well, maybe I'll just machine this worm gear down a little bit. So let me get it out. The problem with that is, let's see if I can get this out with one hand. Probably not, but oh, there we go. The problem is there's not a lot of meat here in order to make up that difference on both ends. Plus that's a race. That's the lower race where these bearings ride on. So I'm not really going to get involved with trying to remachine this in general. I mean, we will have a whole video segment about how we're going to put this whole thing together. This is the top portion of the original steering shaft. I'm going to obviously make a new steering shaft all together. I'll use this top portion so that way it's all in good shape, and that way I don't have to machine all that, save myself some time. And then we'll figure out a way to attach the steering shaft to the worm gear, because the original, this is original, they welded them, they just welded the shaft. Whew. So that's really quick. I try to keep it short for you, but that's how the layout of the steering box goes. I do have a new seal. I do have new bearings, or bushings I should say, for it. I did order some new parts, which, no, these aren't the new parts. These are the new parts. I got a shim kit for the top for the bearing. I got the new seal. And this is the bearing that goes at the top of the new steering tube, the new piece of that, which supports the top of the steering shaft. So we'll talk about all that, because that all has to be, looked at and machined. These are the original parts to my steering shaft, this is the original nut that holds the steering wheel on. There's a spring which is used to hold the cap. I have the original cap. So all of that will be discussed in a later video in order to explain how the steering box goes back together. So let me get to the next portion of this video, which is we're going to be talking about the other aspect of my tractor that was totally bastardized but needs to be attended to. That's this thing right here. And this is the gearbox, or I don't know exactly how you want to call it, but that's the transmission. That's the output shaft of the transmission. The drive shaft goes into a bearing at the lower section here and travels out to the rear. And this box is totally destroyed, and you probably can see some of the problems already in this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually remove the box and put the box on the workbench. With the box on the workbench, I think you can get a better idea of the damage and the bastardizing that happened to it. You can see somebody went absolutely effing bananas with braze. And the reason why it went through that is because they cracked the box. You can see the two cracks there. We flip it over, you can see it's cracked all the way up here, all the way up to where the transmission output shaft goes. They, for whatever reason, it's totally destroyed. And there's cracks in the bolts. There's some here, there's some there. Obviously this has been broken. There's some Healy coils in it. They went absolutely freaking bananas with the braze. They didn't even try to make it nice. So this is really the worst part of my entire senior, but it has to be attended to. I can't put it back together with it in this fashion. I mean, it's essentially it's junk. In my opinion, this is just junk, and there's nothing I can do. I have to fix it. So what did I do? Oh, we're going to have a big machine project. Yeah, that's what I said. I am going to machine a new box. This is cast iron, but we're going to do it out of aluminum. And the reason why I'm going to do it out of aluminum is it's just an easier material to machine. And I'm going to do it all myself, just as I did my oil pan project. I've already ordered a piece of extruded 6061 aluminum, which is going to be more than strong enough to do what I need to do, as well as it has a little bit of elasticity to it, so it could take some shock. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to upgrade this box. We're going to make this box much, much stronger than this cast iron piece ever was. And we're going to do that by this bearing surface that actually goes down. This is all not needed. So this bearing surface will be flat right to the edge. All of this will be one big block of aluminum. We'll machine it down. We'll get the bearing. We'll set the distances. This whole area is going to be all machined real thick and nice. I will have to set the bolts just a hair, so that way, because there's a bigger gear that runs right in this area for the drive shaft, and we'll hog this whole thing out right around the gear, so that way all the sides are super thick and heavy duty. We'll web this area up on the top, because the gear, essentially the gear that goes here is smaller than this a smaller diameter than this opening, and I'll machine down so that way the bolts will be a little bit longer. We'll actually make this probably, I'd say maybe about 1/8 of an inch to maybe between 1/8 and 1/16 of an inch thicker, bigger. Sidewalls will be more substantial. The backside, we'll machine this lip in. That's for the retaining clip for the bearing. We'll basically make this box just as it is, but it's going to be upgraded. It's going to be extremely strong, way stronger than this cast iron piece. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to have our fill. We're going to have the locator for the gear oil, and we're going to drill a hole and a drain at the bottom. So that, because like right now, the only way to drain this on a stock senior is to unbolt the 6 bolts and separate the gear case from the drive shaft tube, and then it would spill the oil out. We're going to drill, we're going to tap, we're going to put a plug. So that's the plan. We'll get this thing all rebuilt, and all perfect. It'll be much better than this one, as well as it's just going to be a cool project. This is going to test all my machining skills that I've learned over the years. But I know I can do it. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'm very hopeful that I'll be able to do it. And I think it'll make an interesting series of videos, just kind of like the oil pan, but just a little bit more intense. So that's it. That's where we stand with the senior. So hopefully you found some of this interesting, either the rebuild videos of the steering box or the soon-to-be big machine project for the gearbox, because we need to get this one piece fixed on mine. And again, once I get that done, the box fixed, it's pretty much tear the engine apart, rebuild the engine, not a big deal, done it 100 times on the channel. Tear apart the transmission, clean it, make sure it's all in good shape, slap it all back together, put the new gearbox on it, start putting everything back in the frame, which happens to be underneath my car. It's all set. I just need to get two bronze bushings for the cross shaft, but that's all done. And as I have shown in the past, the rims, the tires are right there. The rims are basically finished. They just need a coat of primer. The front rims are completely done. The gear cases for the rear, they're all clean, ready to go. I do have to machine the upper gears that go on the rear end. That'll be another project, as well as the gear that's on the transmission output shaft, which, let's go back over here. It's, again, bastardized. Somebody really went to town on this. You can see the amount of wear. See, oh, there we go. Come on. Is this thing going to come off? Yeah, it'll come off. There it goes. It's destroyed. Somebody cut a key in it, and then they did this. I don't know what the hell that is. So all of that is just junk. So I got another gear. We're going to be making this gear. So that's another machine project. We'll put that back in. And then I need to clean up the end of the shaft here. Now, typically, these gears were welded onto the shaft. That's how a wheel horse did it. So I'll probably re-weld mine on. That's my plan. I don't think I'm going to try to bolt it like, well, you could have bolted it, but they had welded them on. So we'll get to that. That's down the road. I got a long ways to go before I get there. So, all right, guys. I know I raced through this video because I try to keep them about as short as possible, but there's a lot of information that I wanted to throw at you. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you find some of these projects going to be interesting in the near future. I also have the fiberglass hood. I'll be starting to work on that also because it's warm out, and it's best for me to do that when it's warm compared to when it's cold because I don't have heat in my garage. And without heat in the garage, there's no way that the epoxy and the fiberglass will really cure properly. What I'm going to do with the hood in general is I'm not really going to reconstruct it and make it all brand new looking. I wanted to keep it kind of beat up and worn in because I'm not restoring the tractor to like I'm not to factory specs, but what I mean, like, repainting it, wet sanding it, all that stuff. We're going to leave it all patinaed, but it's going to run and it's going to work 100%. So for the hood, I'm just going to repair it. Not really going to go bananas and make it all minty perfect. It's going to be minty perfect, flat and smooth, but it's going to look the part. So again, hopefully you find something like that interesting. I've made fiberglass RJ hoods on this channel before, so my fiberglass skills are pretty good. I'm very confident that I'll be able to make it look really, really presentable. So again, thank you very much for all your viewership. Thank you for all your support. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please come back to the channel if you find some of these forthcoming projects interesting, because I'd always like to get your comments and your feelings. And as always, you have a nice day.